Another deep dive. It's November 3rd, 2024, just 2 days away from the U.S. presidential election.
Wow.
This race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump
I know, right?
is getting down to the wire here. And today, we're going to
It's unbelievable.
try to figure out what we can expect to see happen on Tuesday. We're going to deep dive into all this data we've got.
Yeah, you know those top-line poll numbers, they never tell the whole story.
Never.
Never.
Okay, so let's start with the polls.
Okay.
538, New York Times, Siena College, you name it.
Yep.
They're all showing us a statistical dead heat. So what does that mean for each candidate?
Well, basically, it means they're so close. It's like a toss-up.
Oh, wow.
It's so close that the difference between the candidates is smaller than the margin of error in the polls. So either one could win.
Okay.
Statistically speaking,
It sounds like it's going to be a wild ride.
exactly. To make things even more interesting, we're seeing these tight margins across multiple swing states.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Trump is slightly ahead in Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia. But then Harris has these small leads in Michigan and Wisconsin. And Pennsylvania, don't forget about Pennsylvania, it's basically a tie.
So it sounds like
It's wild.
just a handful of votes could decide the entire election.
You're absolutely right. Phil Lavelle, who's reporting from North Carolina, he pointed out that it could come down to just a few thousand votes
Oh, wow.
in just a handful of states.
A few thousand votes.
Imagine that, a
Yeah.
few thousand people.
In a country of over 300 million,
Yeah, it's crazy.
decide who the president is.
Exactly.
That's mind-boggling.
It is.
What does that mean for after the election, though, if it's that close?
Well, that's where things get really interesting and honestly maybe a little concerning.
Oh,
Close elections, they tend to lead to more legal challenges, especially with the political climate we're in right now.
right, because if either side thinks they could have won by a tiny bit, they're going to fight it.
Exactly. And Bruce Fain, he's a legal scholar, he's been pointing out that challenges to voting procedures, early voting,
Mm-hmm.
mail-in ballots, voter roll purges, stuff like that,
Yeah.
those could actually play a major role in deciding the outcome, especially if the margins are super thin.
So even if someone looks like they're ahead on election night, it might not be over.
No, not at all. Remember what happened 2000
Oh, yeah.
with the election? It wasn't certain for weeks because of those recounts and legal battles in Florida.
Yeah.
We could be in for something similar this time.
So are we talking potential recounts,
Potentially.
legal battles, maybe even a Supreme Court decision?
It's a real possibility, yeah. Especially given the history of contested elections that we have in the U.S. And honestly, this uncertainty, it could make people even more distrustful of the whole electoral process.
That's a scary thought.
It is a bit.
We still have 2 days, though. Anything could happen.
That's the exciting part, right?
Yeah.
No matter how much we analyze it or try to predict it, ultimately it's the voters who decide.
Absolutely. All right, so we've covered how close it is in the polls and the potential chaos after the election. But what about the issues that are driving these poll numbers? What are voters worried about? How might that play out in different states?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you look at some of these swing states, you really see how the local issues are kind of mixing with the national stuff.
Right.
Like Nevada, for instance.
Yeah,
The economy and rising costs are a huge deal for voters there.
right. Those Las Vegas service workers.
Exactly.
They're really feeling the pinch of inflation.
Absolutely. The rising cost of living, it's not just Nevada either. These anxieties about money, they're all over these battleground states.
Yeah, I bet people worried about paying their bills and affording health care and putting food on the table.
It's a big deal. So yeah, these kitchen table issues, they're going to play a big role in how people vote.
Absolutely. What about the candidates' strategies for targeting certain communities, though? Like we talked about earlier with the Arab and Muslim American vote in Michigan. Yeah.
How are they trying to appeal to those voters?
It's interesting, right? We hear about the African American vote or the Latino vote. Like there's these giant blocks.
Right.
But it's way more complicated than that.
Definitely.
You can't treat these communities like they're all the same.
No, they have different concerns, different priorities.
Exactly. Tons of factors influence how they vote.
For sure.
And in Michigan, we're seeing that play out right now. Harris is trying to build on the Democratic Party's history with African American voters, while Trump is trying to connect with Arab and Muslim American voters who might not be happy with the Democrats.
Yeah, what about the voters who are thinking about third-party candidates or maybe not even voting at all? What's making them feel so disillusioned?
I think some people feel like neither of the big parties actually care about their problems, you know? They're
Yeah.
tired of all the fighting, the gridlock, the lack of progress.
Like a pox on both your houses.
Exactly. And that's not limited to Michigan. We're seeing that in other parts of the country, too. So if enough people decide to stay home on election day or vote for someone else,
Yeah.
that could change the whole outcome, right?
Absolutely. When it's this close, every single vote counts. Those people who don't like the two big parties, they could be the ones who decide everything.
It's wild how everything's connected, right?
Yeah.
Close polls, swing states, local issues, people feeling disillusioned.
It's all coming together.
It makes it so unpredictable.
Definitely a fascinating time to be watching American politics.
And speaking of watching, can we talk about social media for a second?
Mm.
Every time I open my phone, it's campaign ads and news and arguments everywhere.
Social media has become such a force, right?
Yeah.
Shaping what people think, how they vote. It's a big deal. Both campaigns are using it to reach voters, get their message out, even get people to actually go vote.
It's also a breeding ground for misinformation, though.
It is.
How are voters supposed to figure out what's true with so much information flying around?
It's tough for sure. The key is to be skeptical. Don't just believe everything you see online. Fact check things, think about where the information is coming from, look for evidence,
So we all need to become detectives,
Pretty much.
carefully checking every piece of information before we decide what to think.
We can't just sit back and absorb everything, especially during an election year.
Right.
We have to be informed, we have to be engaged.
It's almost like a giant experiment, figuring out how to separate truth from lies in the digital age.
And the stakes are really high. Our votes have real consequences, not just for us, but for everyone, even the whole world.
Oh yeah, speaking of the global community,
Yeah.
there was that YouGov survey.
Yes.
It found Western Europeans overwhelmingly prefer Harris over Trump.
That's right. A lot of them are also worried about violence in the U.S. if Trump loses.
It's kind of scary to think that our own problems here are making other countries anxious.
Yeah, it shows how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
What happens here affects the whole world. American politics has a big impact everywhere.
So as we head into these last 48 hours, it's clear that this election is about more than just who's president.
Right.
It's about what kind of country we want and what our role is in the world.
It's a huge decision that will shape American democracy and millions of lives, not just here, but everywhere.
Wow. It is incredible to think that in just 2 days, we will know who the next president of the United States is.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, we've covered a lot, haven't we?
We have.
From those super close polls to the chance of legal battles after the election, the issues people are worried about, the whole social media thing, even how this election affects the rest of the world.
It feels like we're watching a huge turning point in American history. All these different ideas, values, visions for the future, all clashing.
And whoever wins, it's going to have a massive impact on the country for years to come. But no matter who wins, one thing's for sure, this election has shown us how divided we are.
Yeah, it's really intense, right? Not just between Democrats and Republicans, but even within those parties themselves. Makes you wonder, where do we even go from here? How do we fix this and move forward?
That's the big question, isn't it? Honestly, I don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
but I think it starts with remembering that we're all in this together.
Right.
We might have different opinions, different backgrounds, different things we care about, but we're all human.
I like that.
Yeah.
We need to listen to each other, try to understand where the other side is coming from, even if we disagree.
Exactly. And it's not just listening, it's actually talking to each other respectfully, finding things we agree on, and working together to make things fairer for everyone.
That's a big challenge, but it feels more important than ever.
It won't be easy, that's for sure. It'll take time and effort and being willing to compromise, but I think we can do it.
This deep dive has honestly given me some hope. Even with all this division, we can still find ways to connect and build a better future.
That's what it's all about, right? Using what we know and understand to make positive changes in the world.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. It's been great having you here to guide us through this crazy election.
It's been my pleasure. And thank you to everyone listening out there. Remember, your voice matters. Stay engaged, stay informed, and most of all, stay hopeful.
That's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll be back soon to explore more of the issues that matter most. Until then, stay curious.